Hi, thank you.
Best place to start would be your role as founder of the Bicycle Day holiday. How did that come about?
Well, sort of by chance. I got the feeling that there ought to be a day for psychedelicists to celebrate, just as we have St. Patrick's Day and Columbus Day. And originally, I was going to have it on the day that Hoffman originally accidentally dosed himself, but that was in the middle of the week, not a good day to have a party. So I decided to have it on the day he first intentionally dosed himself, on the 19th. So that became Bicycle Day. And I named it for the bicycle. He was a little put off by it. He wondered, why didn't you call it LSD Day or something like that? I explained to him that the bicycle is a good concrete image, and it's a lot easier for people to imagine a bicycle than it is a chemical structure of LSD. And also, it happened in the United States. The 18th of April is a famous one for the beginning of our Revolutionary War, and it represents a change of a regime, just like the celebration of LSD represents a change of regime. So that's how it started, and it started just basically in my backyard. And it isn't a very hippie type of holiday. We had some children, families with children there, and depending on the weather, this being April, sometimes the weather was delightful and sometimes it was terrible. It would be either in our backyard or in our house. And there'd be people there. We'd take it easy, relax, and enjoy each other's company. So it was not at all a sort of music scene or what one would think of with hippies, but that's how it started. And then after a few years, I decided to make some patches, some bicycle day patches, and I can show them to you. Um, this is 91, 92, and you know 93 has a gold bicycle on it because this is the golden anniversary of Albert's bicycle trip. And I took this to the conference that was held in San Francisco that Bob, Jesse, and Rick Dowland sponsored. So that this one is a gold bicycle. So then I started sending out messages to people, you know, on Bicycle Day, and it sort of spread by itself. And so here we are. It's been mentioned on National Public Radio and scientific magazines and so forth. So anyway, it started by lucky chance and just continued on with its own sort of momentum. And it's really delightful for me to be able to talking halfway around the world to people on Bicycle Day, and you get to celebrate 420 too. Both days, they're nice that they badge up to each other.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think it's quite significant that we are celebrating this around the other side of the world some 30, 40 years later. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience with some of the founding members of the psychedelic community? Any anecdotes you've collected over the years about Albert Hoffman himself?
Um, well, I never met him, although we corresponded quite frequently. I wrote to him once and asked him if he still had his bicycle. Although it would be too expensive for me to go to Switzerland just to visit him, I would go if I could buy the bicycle. But he said he had gotten rid of it in the meantime, so unfortunately I couldn't get hold of the bicycle. And he was very helpful. And I have I've edited a couple of books, and he's contributed chapters to them. And he's a very, very supportive sort of person, and everybody who's met him has found that. So that basically, so I met him briefly at an interpersonal conference in Santa Rosa, California, and I had him sign there was a museum poster display, so I had him sign that. He was very happy to do that. So very, very pleasant person. Oh, and I wanted to get his autographs on his books. So I collected them and I sent them, and there was something called International Reply Coupon. If you can send it to somebody in another country and they can use it and the postage will be paid. So our little village post office I bought out their entire supply and sent it, and then he sent them back that way. I don't think they'd have anybody ask for them. The postmaster had to go poke around to try to find them. So that's how I got him. But fortunately, I did get his autograph on several of his books.
In 1986, you and Rick Doblin founded MAPS. How did that come about?
Yes, well, Rick Doblin was at a college in Sarasota, Florida, and they had a work-study program where they could work off campus for credit, and he was helping Stan Groff organize his correspondence. And Stan and I have been writing since 1972, and so there was quite a bit of correspondence. And Rick's home is only about 40 or 50 miles from here. So he was home on vacation, and he came out to visit. And we met that time for the first time. And then he started an organization with several different names is probably the best way to say it. And so we were talking, and I became one of the early members of MAPS. He and I were trying to decide what to call it. We came up with MAPS and called it psychedelic studies rather than psychotherapy or psychedelic medicine or transpersonal psychotherapy, because we wanted to include a large number of people, not just people who are interested in psychotherapy. So that's why we called it psychedelic studies. And of course, it gives it the nice acronym of MAPS. So that's how we got MAPS going. Whenever people ask me for, where they should find out about information, I always include MAPS as one of the places they should be sure to check.
How do you feel about the current commercialization or corporate interest in psychedelic research?
I think that, given the culture the way it is, I think that is basically the way to treat most people most efficiently. For example, you and I are talking on computers that are owned by a corporation, and it goes across the internet. The clothes I'm wearing, I can't tell about yours, but the clothes I'm wearing, the chair I'm sitting in, this is the way of getting things spread in our culture. And we like it or not, that's the way it is. I think what we should have is a whole series of ways of using psychedelics. I'd say beer is a good example. I mean, there are large international companies that sell beer, and regional ones, state ones, national ones, and then there are some local breweries, and people can make their own. So I think there should be a whole series of different psychedelic organizations, and people can choose what fits them best and what they feel most comfortable with. And also the main problem is it costs hundreds of millions of dollars to get a drug approved by the Food and Drug Administration and other government agencies. And the chance of bringing that up by donations is very small. A company might start off, which MAPS has its pro bono company going, which I think is a fine idea. But I think the pro bono approach should be one of this whole range, ranging from individual psychotherapists through probably even international companies that would work internationally. People are afraid of patents. That is not likely to be a problem in this area because the molecules are out in the general public, and the treatments have been developed at university medical schools and are sort of out there. So I really don't think that's much of a problem. I can see people worrying about it, but I really think that given our culture and the way it works, is that I think psychedelics can use the corporate culture rather than, as well as the corporate culture using psychedelics.
So let's jump into the contents of your book. I'd like to just take a quick quote from that, and that was, if psychedelic means mind manifesting, minds manifest ideas. So psychedelic minds manifest psychedelic ideas. What ideas did my mind manifest? And so obviously we have this range of terms that ideagen and mind app and multi-state theory that you coined. Could you jump into that for us?
Yes, the background of this is that everybody in the field knows that psychedelics are used in psychotherapy and are getting used that way better all the time. And secondly, they're used in religion. I reserve the word entheogen for the religious use, because it means the origin of it is a religious word. But what is missing, and what I'm trying to get people to pay attention to, is the use of psychedelics to generate ideas. So just as there is our entheogens, I've invented the idea of ideogen. That is, people who take psychedelics generate ideas, and also psychedelics provide evidence for and against some ideas that we have. So I'm trying to get people, not just in the sciences and in psychology, but in the humanities, interested in psychedelics. And in my book, I have a couple of chapters trying to show people how psychedelic-derived ideas can enrich the humanities, just as they can enrich the sciences and the biological sciences. So that's my orientation toward it. And what I do is to try to get people to recognize that psychedelics are not one separate case of improving our minds, but are one of a whole series of what I call mind apps. The word mind app, just like digital apps, is the sort of central idea. And if people remember anything from my book, I want it to be the idea of mind app. What I'm saying is that just as we can write apps and install them in our digital devices, we can create mind apps and install them in our brain-mind complex. And psychedelics are one of the family, but there's hypnosis and lots of types of meditation, exercise routine, breathing routine, transcranial stimulation, even CRISPR and genetic things. So what I want people to do is to see psychedelics as one family among a large number of families of ways of developing what we want to do with our minds. And what this does then is to take these quote, fringe fields from psychology, like meditation and yoga and so forth, and try to see them as all one unit. And that's what I call multi-state theory. So multi-state theory includes psychedelics and all these other techniques as ways of investigating and improving the human mind. So that's where that idea comes from. So multi-state really means using all these different mind apps to have a complete view of the mind. Because most of what we know about the mind is just in our ordinary default mind-body state, which is a very good state, and I'm quite a fan of it. But I don't think it's the only useful state. And I'm trying to get people, philosophers I think would be some of the most difficult, not just to think about different mind-body states, but to improve them and experience themselves. By the way, you notice I say mind-body state. I use that rather than state of consciousness. The word consciousness is confusing because it has too many meanings. And people who are talking about consciousness to each other think they're talking about the same thing, but the ambiguity means they're talking about different things. So when I'm saying consciousness is a perfectly good word in other uses, but when I'm talking about these different mind-body states, I want to call them mind-body states rather than states of consciousness for this particular narrow use.
You also mentioned Thomas Kuhn's criteria for a new paradigm, or paradigm shift in sciences as most people understand it. How does this fit in with the mind app and multi-state theory?
Well, multi-state theory meets the various criteria that paradigms have to have. For example, it includes things that are not usually included, such as mind-body state. So psychology, rather than having all these fringe fields on the edges, they all come to be the center of the field. And so psychology moves from basically single-state psychology to multi-state psychology. Then another thing a paradigm does is to include phenomena that are left out. So this includes psychedelic phenomena, things that happen when people are meditating during hypnosis, brain stimulation, and so forth. So all that data, instead of being sort of fringy and not respected, becomes a central part of the field. And then there are a whole bunch of different types of experiments you can do, because mind-body state then becomes an independent variable, an independent variable. So what this does is open up an avalanche of questions. For example, everything that we look at now in our current state, for example, cognitive psychology looks at memory, perception, different types of memories, and so forth. Every one of those questions in those fields gets restated not only in psychedelics, but in hypnosis, meditation, breathing techniques, and so forth. So the number of questions just balloons and actually mushrooms, because it expands so fast. Not only that, but this is what I find sort of most intriguing. Mind-body theory qualifies as a paradigm, but that's interesting. What I find most interesting is what happens if we combine two or three of these mind apps together. We can then produce mind-body states that have never been produced, entirely new ones, sort of artificial mind-body states. So I think that what we can do is develop a new type of artificial intelligence, one based not on digital electronic stuff, but on our own brains. And we can create mind-body states that have never been created before. For example, suppose we combine psychedelics, transcranial brain stimulation, and various types of meditation. We would come up with a state of consciousness that hasn't been, or probably almost never, experienced before. Not only that, but those three, with psychedelics, there are a lot of psychedelics, there are a lot of doses, all those can change. Cranial stimulation has lots of possibilities. It's not just on or off, and so forth. Meditation is, so forth. So all these things have an enormous number of mind-body states. And if we're going to develop our minds fully, we should develop in every mind-body state, not just our ordinary default state. I find that's the most adventurous idea. The others produce a lot of ordinary, fruitful questions to be investigated, but this is a whole different line of producing mind-body states that have never been produced before. Now, I expect most of them will be useless. And chemistry is a good example here. You can produce an infinite number of new molecules, and most of them are just kind of curiosities. But a few useful ones are extremely useful, and I think we'll find that out with different mind-body states. Because one thing that happens is we can take anything we can do in an ordinary awake state, say various types of thinking and memory and so forth, and ask, how does that vary from one mind-body state to another mind-body state? And we've got these thousands of other states to ask that question to. And this would be a way of mapping the human mind better. We can look at a quality we have, let's say memory, and ask, how does memory vary from mind-body state to mind-body state? And when we do that, we'll get to reformulate our view of the human mind by looking at all those things. There are all the perceptual abilities, emotions, and the physical abilities. So what this does is just it takes psychology up a couple of powers. Not only that, but new mind-body states are being invented and developed all the time. Just like people are writing new programs for digital devices, people can invent new mind-body states, and again, combine them in different recipes or just study what use they are. Ayahuasca is a nice example of that. 20, 25 years ago, almost no one knew of ayahuasca. But now it's one of the real hot fields, and we know that. So all this stuff is happening. By the way, I can see you okay. I realize your light's gone off. Okay. So what this really does is to present a lot of questions and possibilities rather than answers. And what I would like to do is to get people across disciplines and people outside of the university to start looking at psychedelics and other mind apps as ways of developing the human mind and developing culture in a lot of different directions. And also this allows us to import things from other cultures. For example, about 40, 50 years ago, we started importing lots of types of meditation from Eastern cultures. And now we've got ibogaine coming in from Africa. So all these are possibilities of developing our minds fully. And so I consider the developing our minds fully to be, well, for us it would be a constitutional right. For you, if you probably have a Charter of Human Rights and something of that sort. That because this is about making ideas available, evaluating them, and of inventing new ideas, I think that this is a matter of rights, either constitutional or human rights, and charters of human rights. So I think that this is covered by charters of human rights.
I guess a new way of using psychedelics that we've seen is microdosing. How do you respond to the critique that this is used primarily to improve workflow within the current capitalist system of production, Or areas like Silicon Valley and the tech industry, evidence of psychedelics' real ability to catalyze novel ways of thinking.
Well, this is the first thing I got interested in psychology. It was when I was about 10 years old, and I wanted to be an inventor. So I asked my mother, "How do I become an inventor?" And that's the creativity question. I'm particularly fascinated with creativity, and psychedelics, of course, have a very good possibility for problem solving. Jim Fadiman's book, by the way, is the best report that I know of on this. And also, people it's well known that people, say in Silicon Valley and I'm sure elsewhere, are using psychedelics to solve problems. And I think this is probably the biggest opening because that would apply to everybody in every field. And of course, psychotherapy is a way of exploring one's own mind and solving problems. There's psychological problems and there are medical problems. What I'm interested in is intellectual problems and creating more of them and showing people you can use psychedelics to approach them in entirely new ways. I can give you a couple of interesting ideas. One is the biologist E.O. Wilson has an idea called consilience. What it is to work together all the theory and observations in lots of different fields and weave them together in one large field, starting, let's say, with subatomic particles and going through physics and chemistry and biology and psychology and so forth, so that this whole field, these fields get wedded together rather than having them separately. And psychedelics are perfectly right for that because, of course, you take a psychedelic, you're taking something at the chemical level, and yet you get biological results out of it. And more interesting to me is you get these high-level cognitive results. For example, the intense sense of beauty, or probably everybody who's listening to this has probably had the sense of, this is real, this is really real, this is realer than real. So we can then do experiments on the sense of reality or beauty. I really heard music for the first time thanks to psychedelics, and other people have thought this. So we can do experiments on the aesthetic perception and how does that vary. And so all these areas that used to be just sort of armchair philosophy and humanists sort of thinking about them and thinking about beauty and truth and religion and so forth. Meaningfulness is an interesting example. We can actually experimentally produce meaningfulness. Now, that is, we can produce the experience of meaningfulness. Now, how meaningful they actually are is another question. But I don't see that as a problem because, for example, in geometry, there are parallel lines that meet and there's n-dimensional space and so forth. So we can talk about the ideas of meaningfulness without having to say it's meaningful for this, for that, or the other thing. And beauty is a particularly interesting one because probably everybody who's listening to this has had the experience of intensified beauty. You know, it may be a flower, it may be a symphony, or it might be something very simple. It might be, your thumbnail. I've had that experience. So I started getting into my thumbnail. Now, this gives us a different idea of what aesthetics is. I have a lunch with a professor who's a retired professor of art history, and we're working on this problem of what is psychedelic art. And we also immediately think of posters, okay, and all the sort of intensive colors, odd use of shapes and so forth. But I think what makes something psychedelic is not the thing that's being perceived, but the perceiver's mind. For example, as I mentioned, I can look at, I can be fascinated with my thumb. Or when Aldous Huxley had his first trip and went into the drugstore, called the world's largest drugstore. He looked at the art prints and realized that what was different were not the prints, but his way of perceiving them. So I think we have an aesthetic sense in here that we can turn up and turn down. I use the image of a rheostat. You know, for turning heat up in a building, you can set it and heat it or cool it down more. And we have rheostats for beauty, for truth, for spirituality, for meaningfulness, for all these sort of very high level concepts. And we can investigate them now using psychedelics. And also, of course, meditation or hypnosis and transcranial brain stimulation and so forth. So this opens up the humanities to experimental humanities. Now, I don't know if I'm going to get the humanists to recognize that, but I think the new students coming along recognize it.
So how do we encourage more psychedelic research to embrace the arts and humanities?
Yeah, there are a number of directions. Let me give you my own example. I got interested in psychedelics by hearing Stan Grof talk about his theory of the human mind. And as I was an English major, I got interested in what does this have to do with interpreting poetry, plays, drama, and so forth. And I've written several articles, and other people have too, that I would try to show that Stan Grof through the mind, just like Freudian psychology or Jungian psychology before it, adds understanding to works of art. By the way, if somebody wants to have some really fun, I recommend reading Stan Grof's book. It's called, now the new title is LSD Doorway to the Numinous. It was called LSD Realms of the Human Unconscious. And then look at the movie Pink Floyd The Wall. And Pink, the sort of character in this, goes through the stages and the various levels of that Stan describes. It's a very rich movie psychologically from Grof's perspective, and of course a lot of fun to see too. So you can look at all kinds of different things, and I find his view of the human mind has enriched my understanding of my own life, my own mind, but also of culture in general, poetry and movies and so forth. And I think this is a way to get some people in the humanities interested in psychedelics. And I think the humanities are having a hard time now. They're losing students, they're losing support, and some colleges are trying to cut back and release the faculty. I think if we could, this isn't going to solve the entire humanities problem, but at least it'll give a little, I think, a jolt of activity to a field that can use a jolt of activity and attract people who are interested in the psychedelic mind as the psychedelic humanities. And there are two parts there. One is to use psychedelic ideas to understand poetry, drama, and so forth. And the other is to take psychedelics and use them as a way to appreciate alive, with your head on, so to speak, all these various fields. And I particularly would like to get philosophers to do that. Philosophers are stuck in the ordinary default state of consciousness. They can philosophize about psychedelics, but what they really have to do, if they're really interested in the love of knowledge, what philosophy is, they should look at knowledge in every mind-body state and ask, how does knowledge vary from mind-body state to mind-body state? And re-ask that question of every mind-body state out there, including the new ones that are being invented. So this, again, just blows the roof off that field as an example of every other field. Anthropology, of course, has been a rich field this way for a long time. I mean, they're really lucky. They've been doing this for hundreds of years. So anyway, that's what I'm trying to get the academic community alert to.
Go to the audience now, some audience questions.
Hello, good to see you. If you look at the developments that we've used for digital technology, or the misuse of digital technology, with examples of Cambridge Analytica, data harvesting, and mind manipulation, there's accusations of Facebook influencing Brexit, all of that stuff that's going on now. What do we need to do as psychedelic users to hold to account big pharma who are going to start researching, manipulating molecules? How do we keep them operating in an ethical way?
Well, I think that one of the ways to do it is for instance, a lot of psychedelic molecules are in the general public domain, and that's one of the use. And as I mentioned earlier, I think if we have a range of people giving psychedelics, people who are skilled at doing this. By the way, this is a real problem when we move from psychotherapy, let's say, into religion. Who is going to be skilled enough, who will know knowledge enough to use psychedelics in a religious way or in a scholarly way? I'm not satisfied with my answer on that. I don't see big pharma as being the threat that it seems to be. It seems to be, especially in countries that have national health plans, that this can be really taken care of a national health plan. So that one of the fears in America, and I think a very real fear, is that as people develop these various techniques, won't the one that people are most worried about is genetics. Won't the rich benefit and ordinary people and the poor not benefit? I think this is where national health can come in and make sure that it's spread evenly across the culture. Although I'm both hopeful but not too hopeful that we'll get this soon in the United States. Although a lot of the people who are coming on now who are in their 20s and 30s see national health plan as being good, so hopefully we'll move in that direction.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
So you talk a bit about multi-states. I want to know, what are a few of your favorite states and what do you find them useful for?
Well, without a doubt, psychedelics and LSD are my favorite. Um, of course, that's probably because I've had more of those experiences than any others. Also, I often wake up at night and I'm sort of half awake and half asleep. This is when a lot of my best ideas occur to me between 2 and 4 in the morning. And it's sort of a drowsy state, and yet I can get up and I can write down words and then go back to bed, and then a few more will occur to me. I can't really plan this. It just sort of happens if I'm working the night before. For example, now that it's night here, I'm going to bed soon. I may wake up around 2 or 3 o'clock with some more ideas. So anyway, psychedelics are definitely my favorite. Now this speaks largely to my lack of experience. I've only tried meditation a few times, hypnosis once, and I'm sure there are a lot more possibilities that if I were more able I would do it. At my age right now, I have to try to take it easy because my liver and my kidney are not what they used to be. So, at any rate, I can do the breathing exercise, and my own experience. I think is not a very good sample of the overall state. I've never tried cranial brain stimulation, for example. That would be fascinating to do. There was just an article recently that showed that they tried it with some elders, that is people 60 to 80 years old, and it helped their short-term memory, and they had memory more like people in their 20s and 30s. Now, I don't know how long this will last, but I mentioned this to a bunch of retired people that I have dinner with, and of course, they're all very interested in this and want to volunteer to be subjects. So anyway, a lot of this stuff is coming along. Let me say a very good way to keep up on brain-mind stuff. It's free. It's called Science Digest, and every day they send out the news in lots of different fields. I get the field for mind brain, but they cover the whole intellectual spectrum, and they'll keep you up on good things. So it's free. It's called Science Digest, and they have a wonderful mailing list. You can get on as many as you want. I'm on the brain mind one and also religion. So brain mind, they're probably 10 to 20 a day. Religion, probably 3 a week, if that. But it's a fantastic way to keep up on things.
Hi, just wondering, what do you think of using psychedelic therapy in jails on hardened criminals?
Well, if they agree to do it, I think that's fine. Um, I'd say practically any group of people could be used well, but it depends on the type of treatment. For example, Stan Groff, when there was at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Institute, had some people who were criminally insane, and their treatment was part of ongoing therapy. Um, I think I think it would help prisoners a lot. There's pretty good anecdotal evidence that people who can have mystical experiences, and again, the importance of psychedelics is not biological. It's that they produce a mystical experience or a sense of oneness, and that's what's therapeutic. If you take the psychedelic and you don't have the mystical experience, they're not therapeutic. So the psychedelics are useful for mystical experiences. And so if prisoners would have this, they probably would um, um, probably be, when released, be much more eligible to sort of work into society. This might be a very useful technique. And again, what we'd have to do is to try it with a lot of different prisoners and find out how it works with which ones and under what conditions and so forth. It's not going to be just a simple one. Of course, Leary had that original Concord prison experiment, although the results are helpful. They also help the prisoners afterwards, so it's not a good pure test.
Are there any more questions from the audience? I've got one if there's none hanging about. Maybe you could relay this. It's contingent upon whether or not Tom is familiar with the work of Peter, how do you pronounce his last name? The ontologistics guy? Yeah, Josh did. Can you ask him if he's familiar with his work?
Oh, yes. We email frequently.
So, because you did mention before that you thought the philosophers were the ones that would do best with a dose of psychedelics to sort of influence how they see the world. I'm wondering what you think of his view of philosophy, panpsychism. If he could explain what panpsychism in a few words, that would be helpful. And then what he thought of his ideas, maybe.
About panpsychism. I'm very skeptical of panpsychism. I don't know a lot about it. I quote him in my forthcoming book several different times, but from the point of view of, he points out that in the philosophical history, there have been a number of philosophers who have used different mind-body states. Panpsychism, I'm uncomfortable with, but it may be that I will become more comfortable when I become familiar with it. But I really don't think that rocks have consciousness. Or if they do, it's of such a low quality, it really doesn't say much. I think that may be an abuse of the word consciousness, or I just don't really understand the idea. So I'm reporting on my own ignorance on that one. Except I really enjoy his writing and get an email from him. In fact, he's speaking today, only it's in London now, so he's over by now. But I really liked his putting some psychedelic history into the history of philosophy, which history of philosophy really needs. And I really agree with him that philosophers really should do psychedelics in order to understand the human mind more fully. So I'm entirely with him on that one.
Where do you see the place for psychedelics in religion, or religion in psychedelics?
I'm very much in favor of, in fact, I've written some on using psychedelics in religion. Again, in this, as I said, I use the word entheogen for that particular use. I don't have much knowledge. I don't see any reason why there should be particularly mystery cults. I think that they would fit in very well. They could fit in very well with current contemporary religions. And I think that it's a matter of religions having to get used to it. And they change slowly, and we've just got to recognize this. And also, there are a lot of people who are nuns, that is, there's NONES, who are not members of any church and consider themselves spiritual but not religious. I think a lot of those may be people who've had psychedelic experiences. In my own case, I grew up in a very conservative congregational church. This would be the Reformed Church, and sort of left it when I went to college. And I didn't get really interested in religion until I had my own psychedelic experiences. Now, I'm interested now in religion as a religious experience, not in any particular theology or doctrine. And I think that's the way cultures are going. People who have come from strong religious backgrounds tend to see their own religious background as part of a selection rather than the only true and good way. So I think we're going in that direction, but I may be projecting my own hopes on that.
I think that will finish off our talk with Tom. Can everyone in the audience make enough noise so he can hear you?
Thank you. Happy
Mate,
420 day and happy bicycle day. Bye. Thank you. Bye.